Hello, everyone. Welcome to our very first Science Thursday with Brookhaven Lab. I am Aleida Perez from the Office of Educational Programs, and I'm joined by my colleague, Diana Murphy, and who will be managing the Q&A portion of the discussion. Before we introduce our guest for today, as just a few reminders, submit your questions using the Q&A chat section that is on the right side of your screen. We will try to get as many questions as we possibly can. If you have any difficulties or any issues with the video stream, you can let IT know as well by making a comment in the chat section. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the conversation today, today we're going to be talking with David Brown from the Nuclear Data Center here at the laboratory. He's a nuclear theorist at the lab, and what we hope is that to give a sense to all of us what nuclear data is. The nuclear data isn't something that we really talk much about, and so when people hear the word nuclear, they think about often not about bombs and things like that. So today, what we hope is that when we enter into the conversation what is nuclear data, and get to learn or to talk about how it enables all sorts of things, that including nuclear power, nuclear medicine, and space exploration. So welcome, Dave. Dave, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Good. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, I am Dave Brown at the National Nuclear Data Center, and I'm glad to try out this inaugural chat.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How long have you been at BNL?
I've been at BNL, I think it's about 10 years now, almost. Moved here from California. I used to be at Lawrence Livermore National Lab.
And what did you do? How did you start it, or how did you get you started to? How did you motivate you to get into the field of data research, or nuclear data research?
Well, it wasn't my first plan. In fact, it really wasn't part of the plan at all. I was actually hoping to do high energy nuclear physics, doing research for the relativistic heavy ion collider at Brookhaven. So that kind of didn't work out, and I sort of fell into nuclear data, not on purpose, but it turns out to have been one of the best poorly thought out decisions I've ever made.
I like that. Best poorly thought out decisions. So since you mentioned that you work for the National Nuclear Data Center here at Brookhaven Lab, so let's start with perhaps what would be probably the obvious question, I think. So what is nuclear data? What is it that the Nuclear Data Center does?
Well, that's a good question, and nuclear data isn't something that people usually think about. We kind of sit in the background and make a lot of nuclear applications possible. What we do is we collect data tables that help you understand how nuclear systems behave.
And so where are the sources? So is those sources come from like publications, as the data tables that people publish, data results that people publish in in scientific publications, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So the data center, we have about 15 people altogether, depending on how you count them. And as part of our team, we have people who actually comb through literature looking for little data tables in each publication, and nuclear science mainly, and they collect those data tables. And that's one part of what we do. Once we collect these data tables, then they get compiled into a massive database, and then there are other groups of us who take these data sets, you can think of them like little puzzle pieces, and try to assemble a bigger picture of whatever we're trying to understand.
So you take all those data pieces, those data, you put it all together in trying to give the community kind of the big picture of what this data means, so they can make the best decisions for their projects?
Yeah, so you can think of it like we're trying to understand say, a particular set of properties of a nucleus, right? And this property depends on something, say energy. And the different measurements in these publications will tell you about maybe here and maybe here. And our job is to make sure that those two sets make sense together and then explain how they connect to make the bigger picture. And so we try and make these sort of best recommended values, and we package them up and give them to our users for using in their simulation codes.
So is it all the time that this data, I'm assuming that there are times when the data doesn't really fit very well, right? And that's probably when you come into place to try to kind of make sense of that information?
Well, most of the time the data doesn't make sense. I wish it made sense all the time, but no, it doesn't. Usually our job is a large fraction of our job is detective work, going through sometimes experiments that took place in the 70s or the 60s and trying to understand how the detector systems they used 50 years ago behaved, because the modern experiment gets a different answer. So then we have to understand how the two fit together. So it is like putting a puzzle together, but it's sort of a nasty puzzle because the pieces don't always fit. You're not even sure the pieces belong to the puzzle you're working on. And when they do fit, you have giant gaps that you have to fill in with our best understanding of nuclear theory to make the whole picture.
So I'm guessing that when you have then the folks at the nuclear data center will either have to go and they do the experiment that it needs to perhaps fill in the gaps, maybe think about doing a theory that may need to fill in the gaps. Is that something that's where the science piece come into place? Is that?
Yes, this is exactly right. I mean, we're in the data center. We're not just there connecting the dots in some coloring book. We have to go out and do the measurements. We have to do the science, and we have to understand how the science used to be done and how it's done today to pull it all together. So it's kind of an interesting, and it's a different kind of work than I would have been doing in a previous life. So and that's actually what kind of makes it interesting. No, seriously, you don't, oftentimes when you start a project or something, you don't understand necessarily what the interesting parts are until you start doing it. And then you realize, wow, how could I have not been doing this before? This is really neat.
Mm-hmm. That's actually true. That's actually very, very true. So those data sets that the nuclear data center has, is that something that anybody can have access to?
Yes, and if I was wiser in my preparation for this talk, I would have a slide up where I would throw a URL, but it's pretty easy to remember. It's Google National Nuclear Data Center.
And
there's only one, and you're going to find us. And everything we have is there.
So when we talk about, so going back, you mentioned something about it, it's been there, the nuclear data has been around for a long time. So so I just want to kind of backtrack a little bit, and so when did actually this idea of creating this compiling of this data tables or the data sets came about? When this started?
That's a good question, and depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different answer. I'd like to think that nuclear physics started with Mendeleev and the periodic table, but honestly, most people don't like that as an answer. But probably a more practical beginning point would be the Manhattan Project in World War II, because they clearly had a very important need for understanding how nuclei interact. And I just wanted to share a story that I learned about a few days ago about this guy, Hiram Goldsmith. He was actually a part of the Manhattan Project. His job was the data coordinator for the Manhattan Project. He worked at the metallurgical lab in Chicago, which it was in University of Chicago, and later it became Argonne National Lab. Anyway, his job was to collect the nuclear data from the different experiments that were done in support of the Manhattan Project. And so he would go around to the different laboratories, like Hanford, Los Alamos, Clinton Laboratories, which later became Oak Ridge, and he would make sure that everybody's working from the same set of cross sections. And sorry, that's the particular data he was looking at. And so you kind of have to have this mental image of this guy walking around with a pocket full of plots of data. And whenever someone would ask, he would whip it out and show them. And at the end of the war, he and a couple of his colleagues went and published this compendium of those measurements and filling in the blanks to make the curves, published them in Reviews of Modern Physics. And that publication later turned into a BNL publication called BNL 325 that we still produce to this day. And if I was smart, I would have brought the book with because I could flash it. It's kind of huge. Anyway, this guy, Hiram Goldsmith, was one of the founding members of BNL. And he moved here right after the war, was here at the very beginning of the lab, was one of the founding members of the nuclear data team at BNL. And unfortunately, he passed on rather early in life, so we don't really know what he could have done otherwise. But just for some more background, he was very involved in the formation of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and these are the people who advocate for non-proliferation and elimination of nuclear weapons.
Oh, that's actually a very great story. So, BNL had a very important role in ensuring that you have since all the nuclear labs were doing, nuclear science, to collectively find a way to kind of agree into a common set of data to work from. That's actually it's a very important contribution. I'm going to interject because
there's actually more to that story now that you mention. So the fact that he was collecting information from different information sources and bringing them together, he was actually bringing together a whole community to make this data. And this is also a tradition we still do. Every year we have a collaboration meeting that we've been holding for now 50 some odd years, where the whole nuclear data community gets together from all the different DOE labs and some of our international partners and continue this collaboration.
Yeah, it's exactly collaborative science. That's how we do it. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna question from one of our guests. Is the question? One of the questions is what is an example of a data set that a high school students might be familiar with? Is it some that may be part of the NNBC data collection, or data sets in general?
Well, one thing that I learned from my son, who is taking chemistry right now, they're doing a section on radiochemistry, and he has to know what a half-life is. And we are the guardians of the half-lives. I personally am not the person on that project, but my colleague, who under normal circumstances will be right down the hall, she maintains the library that has all the half-lives.
So I must ask, so what does that library set? So what information you gain from that library of half-lives?
Well, that library is called the Evaluated Nuclear Structure Library, and it contains all of the properties that we think of for all nuclei that we know of. I could go into details, but it would probably be a lot of jargon.
So what it will be used for? So if you tell you the half-life, so you're thinking about isotope production, perhaps?
When you say half-life, of course you're thinking about isotope production. You're also thinking about spent nuclear fuel because it decays and produces heat, and it's radioactive. In fact, anything radioactive, you think of half-life. Half-lives come up in the radioisotopes that are used to run spaceships.
Yeah, that's actually true. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. We go through as we talk, we go through the conversation. So we talked about the data. We talked about where the data sets of the whole nuclear data community came from and how it came together. So one of the things that I would like to kind of talk with you a little bit about is sort of the applications. So I know that there's a lot of work that comes around it called nuclear systems. Okay, and you mentioned that earlier in your introduction. So when you say about that, what are you referring? What are you referring to?
I didn't catch what you just said.
So in the beginning, you talk about the understanding of nuclear systems. So what do you mean by that? What do you mean by nuclear systems? Because I think it has to do with the applications that you get from that data, or how it's applied.
when I say nuclear systems, I'm using it in a very broad sense because I mean everything from the nucleus itself all the way up to nuclear reactors, and even
Mm-hmm.
bigger, up to the behavior of stars and galaxies. Because it turns out that to understand the origin of elements in the universe, you need to understand nucleosynthesis, which is how the nuclei were created, either in stars or from the Big Bang.
So the data that is for the data sets that are provided by the Nuclear Data Center helps model those understanding, right? How, for example, origins of the elements help you to model those reactions into how those events came about. Is that something that might be a correct assessment?
Yeah, yeah, and it's even more interesting when you think that the same tools that we use to understand how isotopes change in a reactor are the same tools we're using to understand how different isotopes are created in space, around a black hole or any other of the sites for nucleosynthesis. So there's all these connections in science.
So now that we talk now we are looking about what kind of that is looking at basically at everything and how the behavior of different, whether it's a single nuclear or other way to a star. What kind of possible applications these data sets have that have an immediate impact, that have an immediate impact to our society?
Well, probably the biggest impact of all is in nuclear power, because 20% of the United States power mix is nuclear energy. And nuclear data is essential for making that happen. And it starts in the very beginning when you're enriching the fuel to fuel production, then to fueling up your reactor, bringing it up to criticality. By the way, that just means making sure the exact number of neutrons you're being made are being used so that you are making too many neutrons and having a runaway reaction, or not enough neutrons and then nothing happens. So and of course, as the reactor runs, it's transmuting the fuel or changing the fuel from the fuel isotopes into junk isotopes. And some of those junk isotopes can actually poison the reactor. So you need the nuclear data to understand how that happens. And then when the fuel is used up and all burned up, you need to take it out. And now you need to understand how much radiation is produced by the fuel. And so you can plan proper disposal and handling of it. And all of that requires nuclear data along every step along the way.
How to build it, not just so what I'm getting is you needed to build it to function and the whole and how much energy input, how to control all those things, all that totality of that it's done by me. So nuclear power companies are probably one of your biggest users of that information.
Yes,
that you provide.
That's right, and so are the regulatory agencies and the universities and company and small startups that are developing next generation reactors. So definitely yes.
That's actually very cool to see that, or at least to know that that how this information is used by nuclear energy research in a positive way, making sure that it's done in a proper, safe manner. Another impact that you mentioned before when you talk about the radioisotope information is nuclear medicine, correct?
Yes. And we need nuclear data there in part to understand the production of isotopes, because we make radioisotopes either by taking hunks of interesting materials and sticking them in a reactor, or in the case of Brookhaven as a linear isotope producer, they irradiate samples with protons from the alternating gradient synchrotron. So make radioisotopes, but then we use nuclear data for more than that, because depending on what you're doing with a radioisotope, you're either using it as a diagnostic, so doing medical imaging, in which case you need to understand the radiation that the particles make and how to analyze it to back out what's going on inside the patient. Also, you can use it as a therapy, in which case you want to know what radiation those isotopes make so that you know where they're deposited to kill, say, a cancer tumor.
Yeah, because you have to
Also,
know that. Go
mhm.
ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
then I was going to also mention that there are some new therapies coming where they actually put the patient in front of a particle accelerator and use protons or carbon atoms to do radiation therapy. And that requires a lot of interesting nuclear data.
Yeah, because you have to be able to know not just the dosage, right? And how long you dose the patient, not just how much you have to dose the patient, but how
Hmm.
long that material will be inactive in that tissue of that
Yeah.
patient, because it helps for further dosage of that patient.
Yeah.
So
But
it's
it's even trickier than that. You need that, but you also, it's making radioactive. It's radioactive. It's decaying. It's emitting particles, and you need to understand how those new particles move through the patient to do the job that they're meant to do, whether it's image something or destroy a cell.
That's actually very interesting. It's interesting to see that the applications, the impact that that type of research has, and sometimes people are not very aware that it's there, or that it's kind of is behind the scenes, doing a very important job in how we understand not just what you mentioned, just the nuclear energy, the whole aspect of maintaining reactors for nuclear energy, but also understanding medicine in the way that to treat and to treat patients and so forth. Before I go to a next to something else, to a next question that I have for you, I have another question, and it's a question that one of our listener put in. It says, have you or your team used your data and modeling experience and expertise to help model aspects of COVID-19 pandemic?
Unfortunately, no. We don't have a lot of overlap, and so all I can do is cheer on my colleagues at BNL and elsewhere who are investigating and fighting this disease. Other than that, all I can do is stay home and keep working and hope for the best.
So another question that I got, it says, you have a huge compendium of data. When they Google the National Nuclear Data Center, gives a
Yes.
description of the center, but not the link to the data. Is there any research that high school students could do using the data? Can you give examples?
Well, I can. I actually have I've had a couple of high school students looking in the data. Had one student in the past looking at, so when you shoot neutrons at material, they scatter around. And so you need to know what angle they're emitted at. And I had one student looking at that, and it turned out to be very tricky and for reasons that I'm not going to go into, but that was one project. But right now I have a high school student who's investigating, he's looking at what's called fission product yields. This is when fission happens, you make two fission products. And so he's learning about their distributions and gets to play around with machine learning, and it's a lot of fun.
How can they access? So if a teacher wants to go, one is looking at the NNDC data webpage, how can they extract that database? Which database they will know to look for, something like that?
That's a good question, and I don't think that we've arranged the website easily enough for educators to find things. So this is a very interesting question. Yeah, and I'm liking it because we have talked about this in passing before, but this is a really good idea for a project trying to make the data more accessible. Which reminds me of Norman. Holden was starting such a project, and he's a colleague at the National Nuclear Data Center. He's on the team of people that actually get to name the elements, which is really cool. And he's been working with IUPAC for setting up educational resources.
So maybe this is something to bring back to your colleagues and incorporate an educational site or educational page within the Nuclear Data Center webpage that that takes data sets that are accessible to high school students to collaborate. But you think about it, they can collaborate and they might be able to even support some of the research that you guys that you folks are doing over there. And so that's a challenge for these days.
I might have to reach out to my OEP colleagues for help.
We will help. So that's a great question, and I think that's something that it will engage the community. Not just high school students, but also think about the college students. Like, will be a nice way to engage them as well. So I know that there's some cool stuff going around, some new kind of cool stuff applications that you were talking to me the other day. Can you share that with our listeners? I mean, there is some cool stuff in terms of when it comes to nuclear data applications.
Yeah. So actually, the coolest application that has a bunch of us in our group really spun up about right now actually is it's something to help a widget being made by NASA. And actually, I have some pictures I stole from someone else's slides, if I could show them quickly, if you don't mind. Yeah. So I'm going to try, and we'll see what happens. Share screen. Yes. Share screen. Start sharing. Okay. So this is a slide that I hope you can see it. Yeah. So this is a slide about the Dragonfly mission that's going to be going to Titan. And you can see in the picture, it's some kind of remote operated vehicle. It's actually kind of like a helicopter kind of thing and it's using a tool created by an oil company on it, actually, Schlumberger. You can see the name in the bottom. And what it is, it consists of two components: a neutron generator, which shoots neutrons at dirt, or in this case, Titan's equivalent of dirt. And it has a gamma ray spectrometer. So before I tell you what the gamma ray spectrometer does, I gotta tell you, when you shoot neutrons at things, one of the many things that can happen is they can be absorbed by the nucleus. When they're absorbed by a nucleus, it emits radiation, specifically gamma rays, which is high energy light. Okay. Now, these gamma rays are actually very specific to the isotope itself. So, and each one of these isotopes has basically what you would say a fingerprint of gamma rays that's unique. So, you shooting these neutrons at the dirt, you can actually tell exactly not just what elements are in the dirt, but what's their isotopic composition. Yeah.
So you can go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So this neutron, so the Dragonfly will go on to Titan with its own neutron generator. So you are supporting the NDC support. What is the NDC? I will say the data sets that are out there. How they supporting this type of mission?
Well, we're supporting it a couple of ways. So first off, if you're shooting neutrons at dirt, you need to know what the probability is that the neutron is going to be captured by a particular nucleus. That's the database that I run, the evaluated nuclear data file. The information for that is contained in there. Now, those gamma rays that are emitted, these are contained in several other databases that the NNDC manages. And if you actually go to our website, one of them you can see it's called CapGam, and it's quite easy to use, but it just gives you the energy of every gamma ray. So it's not particularly obvious what to do with that information. But the people who are producing this tool, they will take the spectrum that they receive from the Dragonfly, and they'll use our data to analyze it to figure out this composition. So our data is right there helping interpret what this rover is seeing.
So the data tells you the probability, it helps to support the probability of the absorption, but also helps the manufacturer, the application side of the development of the detector to sort of help to kind of design to make sure that the detector sees the appropriate fingerprint to that particular gamma ray that has been emitted. That's actually very cool. So I heard somewhere that this is not kind of new, that the oil exploration folks use this kind of technology. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I can't show you the rest of the talk. It gets rather technical really quickly, but I can outline what they're doing. Let me see, maybe the next slide might have a picture. No, no. Okay, this is the same tool being sent to Venus. That's another planned mission. Hold on. Wait, maybe I can show you a picture. Yeah, so this is a picture from this Schlumberger company. So what they do is they actually use the same tool for doing what's called oil well logging, which is fancy speak for looking for oil underground. And so what you see on the left is the tube, the hole that they dug with the drill bit. And at the end of the drill bit, they actually have one of these widgets. They have a neutron source. That's the red dot that shoots neutrons out in the dirt. And then they have two detectors that capture, one of them captures gamma rays, the others capture neutrons in case they bounce back. And from these two pieces of information, they can do what I just described for Titan, but underground. And then they look for oil and whatnot.
That's very cool. It's very cool to see how, this sort of the different techniques of different technology is broad use, right? Not just for one purpose, just for this particular purpose, has a broad use in various applications. So
Yes.
Dave,
let me get out of this then.
Yes. There is a question here for you. It's a question here for you. Why do they care about Titan's isotopic composition of the dirt?
Well, they maybe care a little bit about the isotopic composition. They probably care more about the elemental composition to find out if it's made out of the same elements and the same ratios as Earth. But the isotopes can tell you other interesting things. But I'd have to be a space physicist to really get in. But yeah, so I can tell you a little bit about how long the dirt has been sitting out on the surface of Titan. And you've heard of carbon dating. Carbon dating also, you don't just have to use carbon. There are other isotopic combinations you can use for aging, measuring the age of things. So I would assume, having not talked to a NASA person, that they're also investigating using that since they have done that in past space missions.
Just to see how old, right? The age of the planet.
Yeah,
the moon.
But it's probably a difficult measurement.
So Dave, I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I want to, because I'm sure probably there's some students watching, listening to this, and I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about every students and fields and mentoring and so on. So, how long I heard you say, somewhere I heard you say before that you always knew you wanted to be a physicist, correct?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a physicist. I didn't necessarily want to be a nuclear data physicist, but I did pretty much always want to be a physicist.
So what was the path that you took to get there?
Well, I was always sort of drawn to the sciences. It didn't hurt that my parents were both chemists and strongly encouraged all of their children to go into science in some fashion. They did not go into science, but we were encouraged to. And when I got to college, I started taking more physics courses and more math courses, and the more I learned, the more intrigued I got, and it sort of snowballed from there. And that's probably not a very clear answer.
But so if a high school kid is listening and wants to follow a STEM path, being a physicist, what kind of preparation he or she should have or should do, or you are advised to do?
Well, in my case, math helped a lot, and computers I'm, I predate the internet, but that's okay. uh, you, learning how to use computers and how to program has become an integral part of what I and my colleagues do, and so learning to program is essential. But there's one thing that we scientists tend to overlook, which the older I get, the more I realize is its importance, and that's the ability to write. Um, and as a scientist, I always hated writing, but oddly enough, that's most of what we do as scientists. We're either writing emails to colleagues or writing grant proposals or writing reports,
Mm-hmm.
writing papers, and it's just part of the job. You need to be good at writing.
You have to do it. Yes, I
Mhm.
actually, that's a very good advice because you have to get your funding sources and be able to get your funds, and you have to be able to do that in a clear way.
Yeah.
I know that, uh, and there's, I know you have mentored a lot of high school and you have mentored a lot of college students. And actually
Mhm.
today in the BNA website, there is an article about an undergraduate student from the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, that you actually mentor
Mhm.
as a student of the Science Undergraduate Laboratory Internship, the DOE funded internship here at the lab.
Yes.
So I know that you regularly mentor students. So
Mhm.
why did you do it? Why, why do you mentor the students?
Well, students bring a lot of things when they come to the lab. They bring energy and they bring a different perspective. And uh, so oftentimes when I propose a project, the student will come in and they'll start working on it and things won't work. But the students digging in and they might have a new idea for a different avenue to go on and that I personally hadn't had the time to investigate. And through a dialogue with the students, oftentimes we go in a different direction, but it's usually a very useful direction and uh, direction I wouldn't have thought of doing myself. And of course, the students are so enthusiastic when they come here that you just can't help but feel their energy. And it just makes it for a very pleasant summer that's very exciting and interactive.
Yeah. Any cool stories that you may have about any of your students that you have mentored? Anything that they have done that it was different and unique from what you have thought about or the way you have
Um,
thought about
I think all of my students have brought uh, something different to the story, and so it's hard to pick just one. But
it? Mhm.
the fact that you can read about one in today's news, I thought was exciting. I did not expect that at all. Um,
What did
and
he do?
his project. Hmm?
What did he, would you mind sharing a little bit what was the story about? What did he
So
do with you?
yeah. So in his case, he was looking at these things called neutron resonances. Okay, bear with me. When you shoot a
Mm-hmm.
neutron at a nucleus, uh, sometimes at very special energies, the probability of getting interacting with the nucleus jumps into some gigantic amount, right? Those special energies are the energies where the neutron resonances occur. Okay, so his project was to look at the statistical distributions of those energies, which sounds sort of esoteric and honestly kind of boring, but turned out that um, by looking at these distributions, we realized that we could actually assign the quantum numbers better using a little machine learning magic. And uh, and the way the way the student described it was you kind of have to imagine you have magical buckets, right? Imagine having three magical buckets, and inside the buckets are random collections of red, blue, and green marbles. The
Mm-hmm.
magical bucket shows you the average color of all the marbles inside.
Mm-hmm.
So the job of our code and this project did was essentially sorting the marbles just by looking at the outside of the magic buckets. And you think, well, that can't possibly work because you can't tell, all the buckets are just sort of brownish gray. And So
Yeah.
you just randomly move one marble from the other until one starts looking a little greener
Mm-hmm.
and another one starts looking a little red. And it turns out that you can actually sort the marbles, or in our cases, the neutron energies or resonance energies.
So he it looks like that he had a he learned. It looks like from what you're describing, he did a lot of machine learning and a lot of process to that to
Yep.
do that kind of experience. So those are the skills that the students learn and
Hmm.
get from this kind of experiences that they can take further out into whatever career path they decide to go
Yeah.
into. So, and I know again, I know that you have mentored a lot of students, but you also had mentors in your life, right? And so, can you think of any mentor that you had that may have, what advice that you may have received from any of them that have guided you through
Mhm.
your career path?
Well, probably the mentor that impacted me most was my thesis advisor. And he had a very funny way of mentoring. He wasn't a particularly good communicator, and that was okay. What he did was he would have a discussion with you, and they would ask a very interesting question, and then you would get hooked, and then you go run off to your office and think about it for a while, and maybe come back in a few days, and then you say, "Well, I got this," and he'd be like, "Well, but did you think about that?" And you'd be like, "Oh, that's really neat." And so through this dialogue and this and asking questions, he just sort of drew me in, and I realized that give and take is essential in science. That
Mhm.
when I'm mentoring, I'm not just dumping a problem on a student and say go away. No, I'm asking them to go solve a little piece. What did you get? Did it come out this way? No. Oh well, then how about to try this? And then engage the student and draw them in, and it works pretty well.
Yeah, that's our role is to kind of create, show them a little bit of the path that they have to take, but at the same time, we hope that they get the tools to figure some things out on their own as well. It's a
Yep.
it's a it's a it's a process. Um, are there any other questions from the audience before any other questions? Right. So I thank you, Dave, for spending some time with us today. Uh, Thank you, everybody, for being part of our first Science Thursday with BNF, with Brookhaven Lab. I just want to share with bear with me for a little moment as I am learning how to use these tools as well. So I want to share with you our next Science Thursday with Brookhaven Lab. We will be on the 18th of June. We have invited Jantana Kiritawi, and she is a biochemist and a plant biologist in the biology department. And we will have a conversation about plant sciences and biofuels, and it will be extremely interesting one as well. And if you want to learn more about our programs, we have our webpage, bnl.gov/education. Let me see if I can get this right. Did I get it right? Yes. Yay. So we'd like to thank Brookhaven Lab for hosting this event, and I encourage you to check out our programs, our internships. We have a DOE Science Undergraduate Laboratory internship, and if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out as well. Thank you very much for this time. Stay well and see you next time.